It always happened during night shift. I worked as a security guard at a warehouse in this old, dark building. The building was huge. It had 3 floors, each floor being thousands of square meters. I was supposed to patrol the building to make sure no one would break in. It felt creepy at first, performing rounds in a nearly 10,000 square meter building while being completely alone, but over time, I got used to it. During my night shift, the last room I always passed by was on the first floor. That room always gave me chills and made me feel unease. This room was always dark. No matter what I did, the lights wouldn't turn on. I called a repairman so many times, but it was to no use. The lights wouldn't turn on. The room gave me the creeps, and I always avoided it, but the procedure required me to enter it. I approached it as slowly as I could. I actually dreaded the moment I had to pass in front of it more than anything. I slowly turned the doorknob and cautiously opened the door, almost half expecting to see someone hiding inside. I was expecting to find a burglar hiding there, trying to rob the warehouse. But there was nothing. I turned on my flashlight and looked around the large dark room. My eyes were moving nervously, trying to put the corners of shelves into focus, trying to spot a hidden face. I took a deep breath and entered the room, with my flashlight pointed in front of me. I could feel the hair on my neck standing up. That room was dead silent. There was no wind, but the door suddenly started closing behind me, as if something had pushed it. I put my left hand on the door to keep it open and moved my flashlight rapidly in every corner of the room, looking in every detail around the room. Nothing, nothing, nothing. I kept repeating these words to try to reassure myself. I saw it out of the corner of my eye. I definitely saw it. It disappeared so fast that I can't even describe it. It was gone, as simple as that. I immediately pointed my flashlight to the spot I saw it. I saw nothing but the shelf's shadow. I came closer to the shelves to take a better look, but I didn't find anything. I kept moving my flashlight around the room when I heard it. It was a tiny metallic noise coming from the ground between the shelves. I turned the flashlight to the ground, and there it was, a knife. It was just a common kitchen knife. I bent and picked it up, the glow of my flashlight revealing my trembling hands. "What do you think you are doing here?" I hear those words behind me and turn around in an instant, pointing the flashlight at the face that just spoke to me. The flashlight light illuminated his pale face and dark circles under his eyes. His eyes were blood red, and he had the most disturbing and twisted smile I had ever seen. His hair was dirty, long, and oily. He was skinny and taller than me. He took a step forward, and I did the same, pointing the flashlight at his eyes. "Put it down," he said, pointing his own flashlight at my face. I threw the knife at his arm, and it pierced his skin. I heard a cry coming from him, and he grabbed his arm. With my second hand, I took out my baton and hit him on the head, but he dodged it. He took out a knife of his own and stabbed my flashlight, breaking it and making it go completely dark. I defended myself with my baton, hitting him wherever I could, desperately trying to escape from there. He was much stronger than me. He managed to disarm me and pushed me to the ground with his entire strength. The knife was centimeters from my eyes. I grabbed the knife and pushed it back at him with my leg. His scream fused with the sound of the blade piercing his flesh. He fell on the ground, squirming in pain, and I took the chance to immediately run out of that cursed room and escape that dreadful building. I did report that to my superior and to the police, but he was never found, and no one checked if I was telling the truth either. I no longer work as a security guard, and I haven't gone back to that building ever since. I cannot get that scene out of my head, and I doubt I ever will. At one of my earlier retail jobs, I worked the night shift to help cover the weekend rush. It was a peaceful job. Most nights were rather calm. I would close, and after all the customers were gone, I would do a final loop around the store to ensure everything looked tidy before officially closing up shop. One night, during one of my closure laps, my usual solitude was pierced by the unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. Thinking it was just a customer returning something, I approached the front slowly, ready to greet them in my practiced, professional manner. But as I stepped out from behind the corner, a chill ran down my back. The store was empty. My mind was telling me I had stepped out into an empty store, yet something was off. A stranger stood in the middle of the floor, his back to me as he browsed one of the aisles. My initial relief at having someone there morphed into a hard knot of foreboding in my stomach. Strangers didn't just hang out in the store, not at this time of night. There was something unnerving about him, and I had an undeniable urge to turn around and flee. But there was something strange about how he was standing, almost hunched over. He reminded me of a vulture, a predator standing over its prey. My mind told me to turn and run, but my feet were frozen. Instead, I forced myself to take slow steps towards him, the echo of my footsteps bouncing off the empty shelves. The stranger didn't react to my approach, his head remaining bowed as he continued to peruse the aisle. As I moved closer, I could make out that he was quite thin and his skin wore an unhealthy pallor. His unnaturally long, dirty hair was in desperate need of a trim and fell in greasy strands around his face. Summoning my courage, I called out, "Excuse me, sir? The store is closed." My voice echoed in the stillness, and my ears strained to hear his response. For what felt like an eternity, he stood silently. Then, just as I took a step closer, he abruptly turned to face me. His face was dominated by a strange, twisted smile. His eyes, instead of seeking me out, seemed to be looking straight through me, like I was a ghost or a figment of his imagination. He pushed himself away from the shelf and started walking towards me, his mouth still contorted in that unsettling smile. I felt a surge of pure terror rip through me as his eyes finally focused on me, and a cold shiver racked my body. In that moment, an understanding washed over me. This stranger was not just a stranger, he was a predator. His smile, his strange posture, the glint in his eyes, it all made sense. Fear propelled me into action. I dodged around him and ran for the back of the store where I kept my phone. The sound of his footsteps followed me, soft but insistent, like a cat stalking its prey. My mind was flooded with fear, a primal urge to survive. I reached for my phone, fumbling with the keys, when suddenly something grabbed me from behind, a hand with a grip like iron. I let out a scream, but it was immediately muffled by a hand slamming over my mouth. I struggled against my captor, my whole body trembling with fear, but he was too strong. Just when all hope seemed lost, I managed to slip my hand down to my pocket, where I kept my pepper spray. I fumbled with it for a moment before finally aiming and spraying. My cries were swallowed by his as the powerful stream of pepper spray hit his eyes. He let out a roar and stumbled back, clutching his eyes in pain. I scrambled to my feet and bolted towards the front door, not daring to look back if he was following me. My heart pounded in my throat as I ran, the sound of the locked door reverberating in my ears. I couldn't stop until I was out of the building, safe under the warm glow of the streetlights. I frantically dialed the police and reported what had happened, still in shock, my body trembling with fear and adrenaline. The police arrived quickly, but the stranger was gone. They searched the store thoroughly, but there was no sign of him. It was as if he had disappeared into thin air. One of the officers told me it was likely he'd been robbing the store before I interrupted him. I quit that job soon after, the terror lingering, transforming every creak and every shadow into a reminder of that night. The true horror was that he could still be out there, that twisted smile forever etched into my memory, a silent testament to the evil that lurks in the darkest corners of our world. So, I worked in a plant at the time. Shifts were okay, nothing scary or too unusual. One night, it was my turn for the night shift. I was working alone as usual. The shift started at 11 p.m., and things were pretty quiet. Our plant is rather big, so I had to do rounds every couple of hours and check every area of the facilities. During my rounds, I noticed a figure standing in the shadows at the end of a hallway. It was like a dark silhouette. It was not the first time I had seen that figure. I had seen it once before 3 nights ago and the night before, but it always disappeared quickly. I tried to convince myself that it was just my mind playing tricks on me because I was alone in the middle of the night, but this time I was determined to get a closer look. I slowly approached the end of the hallway, my heart pounding in my chest. As I got closer, I realized that the figure was wearing a dark hoodie and had its face covered with a bandana. It was holding something in its hand, but I couldn't make out what it was. I stopped in my tracks, unsure of what to do. The figure didn't move, just stood there watching me. I took a deep breath and tried to speak, but no words came out. I felt like ice in my veins. The figure tilted its head, as if it were curious about my reaction. For a moment, we just stared at each other in silence. No words were spoken, but our gazes sent a million unspoken thoughts. Then, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. I stood there frozen, watching as it disappeared. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of what I had just seen. I finally snapped out of it and ran back to my post. I couldn't believe what I had just seen. I was scared, but I was also determined to figure out what was going on. I didn't tell anyone what I had seen that night. I figured there was no point. I didn't have any evidence, and I didn't want to look crazy. But I knew that I had to be careful. This strange figure was up to no good, and I was its target. The next night, I was back on the night shift. I was determined to find out who this figure was and what they wanted. I also bought a self-defense spray from a nearby store, as I didn't know what kind of troubles I could have met. The night passed by without incident, but I was still on edge. As usual, I was patrolling at around 2 in the morning when I saw it again. This time, it was closer than ever before. The hooded figure was standing a few feet to my right, just outside the dim light of one of the security cameras. My mind went blank, and my breath caught in my throat. All I could do was stare at the stranger in front of me. My hand went to my pocket where I kept the spray. I wanted to make sure that it was there in case things suddenly became dangerous. I never expected to use it and face whatever was behind the stranger that constantly stalked me during my night shifts around the huge, empty facilities of the plant. I didn't know what to do, but this time I felt something strange, as if my mind was clashing against something else. There was something very disturbing and strange in the air that I couldn't describe, and something inside me wanted to escape, to leave the body, to leave the facilities, to free myself from this terrible, scary, and horrible sensation. Without thinking, I whipped out the spray and pointed it at the figure. I yelled at the figure, telling them to leave me alone and to leave the facilities. To my surprise, the figure did not react. It didn't speak. It didn't disappear. It didn't move. It just stood there. My illusion started vanishing as if it was a dream. The lights in the plant briefly turned off for a second, and then they turned on again. The figure was gone. I was in disbelief and shock. I didn't know what to think and what to do. I figured the problem was over. But then I saw it again right in front of me. It was back. But this time it was very different. It was very close enough for me to examine it better. I examined it, but I didn't want to look at it. It was horrifying. I couldn't tell what it was. Whatever it was, it horrified me in ways I couldn't imagine. It wasn't human. Suddenly, the air around me moved. There was wind all around me. My mind was going insane, and the unrealistic, impossible thoughts dominated me. I felt like flying, like leaving my body, like putting an end to this suffering and this fear. As my body was collapsing on itself, unconscious, my mind was finally free. I woke up a few hours later. Everything was normal. Then, I went back home completely unaware that the hooded figure never left. It was always in the shadows, behind me,